Ever get that feeling like history is a big game of telephone? By the time the story gets to us, it's like more gossip than actual fact.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's what today's deep dive is all about. We're separating truth from fiction in the story of Elegabalus, a Roman emperor with a, shall we say, colorful reputation.
What's really fascinating is that Elegabalus only ruled for 4 years, but their story has really echoed through the centuries. We're talking ancient Rome, 218 AD, a time when projecting strength was, especially for men, super important.
Yeah.
Yet here comes this teenager, a priest of the Syrian sun god Elegabalus, and boom, suddenly they're in the ultimate seat of power.
Talk about pressure. Just imagine being a teenager leading a country, leading Rome. And not just any Rome. We're talking about a Rome completely obsessed with masculinity and super suspicious of anything, well, foreign.
Right.
And our sources on Elegabalus are, well, let's just say they had their own agendas.
Exactly. It's so important to remember that most of what we know about Elegabalus comes from historians who were part of the Roman elite. And honestly,
Yeah. They were not thrilled with this young foreign emperor coming in and shaking things up.
okay, so let's talk about some of these shakeups. Starting with religion. Elagabalus didn't just bring their own god, they put Elagabal at the top of the Roman pantheon. It's like showing up at, I don't know, a black tie party in a neon tracksuit.
Yeah. It was a direct challenge to everything. The Roman elite saw this as a huge threat to their power. They were used to Jupiter being the head honcho, not some, foreign sun god.
Right, right. And then there's the influence of Elagabalus's mother and grandmother. They weren't just, at home baking cookies.
Oh, no.
They were wielding real political power, even having their images on coins.
This was totally unprecedented. Roman women, especially those of high status, were expected to be largely invisible when it came to politics. Elagabalus elevating the women in their family so publicly that really messed with the traditional, patriarchal structure.
Yeah, for sure. And let's not forget the rumors about their lifestyle. Lavish feasts, exotic clothes. I even heard there were lions roaming around at their dinner parties. Oh, yeah, if you're going to make a statement.
Right.
This all plays into the image of Elagabalus that we have, an image very carefully crafted by their political opponents, don't forget, to make Elagabalus look extravagant, excessive, and ultimately unfit to rule.
It's like a Roman reality show, but with way higher stakes.
Yeah.
So how much of this is real and how much is just like good old-fashioned Roman smear tactics?
That is the million-dollar question. To even begin to answer it, we need to look at the language that was used to describe Elagabalus. One word that pops up all the time is militia. It basically meant softness or effeminacy.
Wait, so calling someone soft was like a way to discredit them back in ancient Rome?
Totally. Roman masculinity was all about strength, dominance, control. Any deviation from that was seen as weakness, and using militia was a really powerful way to attack someone's character, to undermine their authority.
So was Elagabalus genuinely challenging Roman ideas about masculinity? Or were they just an easy target, for people who wanted them gone?
Probably a bit of both. On one hand, we have these accounts of Elagabalus pushing boundaries and doing it in ways that really made the Roman elite uncomfortable. Their religious reforms, the elevation of women, even just their personal style, and of course, all the rumors about their relationships.
Yeah, right. The rumors about their love life. It's a whole other chapter in the Elegabalus saga. Apparently, they had multiple lovers, male and female, which in itself wasn't that unusual for Roman emperors. But then there are the more scandalous rumors. Marriage to a male charioteer, an affair with an athlete,
Yeah.
even a Vestal virgin.
And that's where things get really, really interesting. Remember, the Vestal virgins were priestesses who were sworn to chastity. So the very idea of one of them breaking their vow was incredibly scandalous. It played right into the hands of anyone who wanted to portray Elagabalus as a corrupting influence.
Yikes. That's hidden below the belt. Or I should say toga. But it's clear this wasn't just about sex. It was about power and control.
Right. By associating Elagabalus with all these scandalous rumors, their opponents could paint them as a threat to Roman morality, to the whole social order. It further justified their efforts to, discredit Elagabalus and ultimately remove them from power.
It's like they invented spin, huh? So did Elagabalus actively present as female?
Some accounts describe Elagabalus wearing makeup, shaving their body, even asking to be called lady. But we have to remember, our sources are those same biased historians. It's like trying to get a fair review from your biggest rival.
So how do we sort through all this conflicting information? How do we get to the real Elegabalus?
We have to look at all the evidence, but we have to look at it with a critical eye. Who wrote this? What were their motivations? We also need to consider other forms of
Uh,
evidence, like portraits on coins and statues, which, by the way, tend to show more masculine presentation.
So is it possible Elagabalus was kind of forced to conform to public expectations of what it meant to be masculine while expressing their gender differently in private?
It's definitely possible. And it raises these really intriguing questions about navigating gender identity in a society as rigid as ancient Rome.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
Yeah,
And the ones you do have, they might be from a totally different puzzle.
exactly. And that's what makes Elagabalus' story so fascinating, but so challenging. It forces us to really confront the limits of what we know, to acknowledge the biases of the people who wrote these accounts, and to understand that trying to make sense of the past through today's lens is, well, really complicated.
Well, if this is just the appetizer, I can't wait for the main course. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
And we're back, still diving deep into the enigma of Elegabalus. You know, it's crazy how a figure from almost 2,000 years ago can still cause so much debate, so much intrigue.
It's like their story just pulls you in.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out the questions of gender, power, and how history gets written.
Absolutely. And speaking of being drawn in, Elagabalus' story has been captivating artists and writers forever. They've become like this mythical figure,
Yeah.
someone who challenged authority and lived authentically.
Makes me think of Oscar Wilde, for instance.
Yeah.
His book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, was really inspired by the whole decadent aesthetic that we associate with Elagabalus.
Exactly. Wilde, who is known for pushing boundaries himself, he saw a kindred spirit in Elagabalus, someone who just completely rejected the morality of the time. They were both condemned for their supposed transgressions, which I think speaks volumes about the lasting power of Elagabalus' story. It resonates with people who feel like outsiders.
So even centuries later, in the late 1800s, Elagabalus' story was still challenging norms, still starting conversations. It makes you wonder if some things never really change.
Absolutely. That desire to just label everything, to categorize and fit people into these tiny little boxes, it's
Yeah.
human. It transcends time. And Elagabalus, with their complete defiance of easy categorization, well, they just continue to challenge that impulse.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just dates and battles.
Yeah.
It's about people, real people, with complex lives and motivations.
Mm-hmm.
People who, challenged things,
Oh.
pushed boundaries.
Exactly. And sometimes those people get demonized or misunderstood by the people in power. Which brings us back to that term canitas, which we talked about a bit earlier. It was basically a slur. It used to put down men who were seen as effeminate and who, enjoyed a more passive role in their relationships.
Sounds like just a way to control and shame people
Yeah.
who didn't fit into the Roman idea of what a man should be. Makes you think about how language is always used as like a weapon to enforce power.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that the way history is told, it's often shaped by, well, the people in power. The victors write the history books, as they say.
Right, right. So how do we navigate these biased accounts? How do we separate what's true from what's, propaganda?
It's tricky. It's about reading between the lines, questioning everything,
Yeah.
and really considering the motivations of the people who wrote these accounts. And we have to be aware of our own biases, too, how they might be coloring our interpretation of the past.
That's a tough one. It's almost like trying to see the world through someone else's eyes, someone who lived in a completely different time.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the challenge and the reward of trying to understand history.
It is. It's a challenge worth embracing, though, because the more we understand the past, the better we'll be able to navigate the present to shape the future.
Okay, so we've got these biased accounts. We've got these loaded terms like militia and canides, and this image of Elagabalus as, this extravagant boundary-pushing figure. Where does that leave us? Can we say anything for sure about their life and identity?
We can definitely say that they were a young emperor, foreign-born, who challenged Roman conventions in a ton of different ways. Their reign was short, is controversial, and their story has been told and retold through the perspective of those who wanted to discredit them.
It's like we have this, like a blurry picture of Elagabalus. We can kind of see the outline,
Yeah.
but the details, they're fuzzy and open to, interpretation.
Exactly. And that's where the real historical inquiry begins. It's piecing those fragments together, acknowledging what we don't know, and embracing the ambiguity.
It's like a historical whodunit. But instead of trying to figure out who committed a crime, we're trying to figure out who this person actually was.
Right. And the most important thing to realize is that we might never get a definitive answer,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that the search isn't important.
So are you saying that the journey is, like, more important than the destination?
Yeah,
That it's more about asking the right questions than finding all the answers?
absolutely. It's about having a conversation with the past,
Yeah.
understanding the complexities, and, well, just acknowledging that history is a conversation that keeps going.
It's not a closed book.
Right.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson that Elegabalus can teach us. To question everything, to embrace the unknowns, and to realize that the past isn't really the past. It's a story that keeps going, that keeps challenging us, and that invites us to really look at our assumptions about gender, about power, and how we tell the stories of the people who came before us.
That's beautiful. And that's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
a mirror reflecting our own humanity, our struggles, and our triumphs.
It's a reminder that the past is never really gone. It's still here, whispering secrets, just waiting for us to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what other stories are out there, just waiting for us to unearth them,
Right.
to reinterpret them. That's what makes history so exciting, the possibility of discovering something totally new, something that really makes us think and helps us see the world in a new way.
It's about making that connection with the people who came before us, recognizing that we're all human, and realizing that the past isn't just a bunch of facts and figures, but a living, breathing thing made up of all these lives.
And speaking of weaving stories, we've got one more thread to untangle in the Elegabalus story. We've talked about Elagabalus's reign, all the controversy, the challenges to Roman norms, and of course those biased historical accounts that kind of created their image for us.
Mm-hmm.
But what about their legacy? How have people seen them throughout history? What can we learn from their story today?
It's amazing how relevant Elegabalus still is. Even after all this time, they've become like this mythical figure, a symbol of rebellion, transgression, fluid identity.
It's like their story is a Rorschach test, isn't it? People see what they want to see, a trans icon, a victim of politics, a warning about, I don't know, excess.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes their story so fascinating. It just doesn't fit into a neat little box. And that forces us to really think about our own assumptions about, well, everything. Gender, power, history itself.
So how has Elegabalus' story been reinterpreted over time?
Well, in some ways, they've become a symbol of everything the Romans were afraid of. The other, the outsider, the threat to their values. Their story has been used to kind of reinforce negative stereotypes about foreigners, about people who, challenge gender norms, about anyone who lives outside the lines.
Like a warning. Like, don't be like Elegabalus.
Right. But at the same time, their story has also been a huge inspiration, especially for people who feel like they don't fit in or who have been misunderstood. It reminds us that throughout history, there have always been those people who defied expectations.
And who challenged what everyone thought was, the right way to be.
Exactly. And even when they were opposed, they still lived authentically. They made a difference.
So how do we make sense of all these different ways of looking at Elegabalus?
I think we just have to accept that history is never simple.
Yeah.
It's messy, it's complex, it's like a tapestry that's been woven from all these different perspectives, different agendas, different biases.
So it's up to us to try to untangle those threads,
Mm-hmm.
to really look at the evidence and, be open to the fact that our understanding of the past, well, might not be the whole story.
Right. And I think that's one of the most valuable lessons we can learn from Elegabalus. To be humble, to be curious, and to question everything.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into, well, the very complicated world of Elegabalus, what are your thoughts? What do you make of their story?
To me, it's a really powerful reminder that history isn't over. It's a conversation that never ends. We have to be critical of what we read. We need to consider all sides. And remember that the past, it's still with us.
It's a story that still matters, that makes us think, and, makes us really look at what we think about gender, about power, and about history itself.
And it reminds us that even in ancient Rome, people dared to be themselves, even when it meant facing, condemnation, opposition.
And that's worth celebrating, isn't it? The courage to be yourself, no matter what.
Absolutely. It reminds us that fighting for equality and acceptance is a long fight, but it's a fight worth fighting.
Well said. So on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Elegabalus. We hope you enjoyed it, and we really encourage you to keep exploring those hidden stories, The forgotten voices. That's what makes the past so interesting, so relevant to our lives now.
Remember, history isn't just dates and names. It's a living, breathing thing made up of the lives of all these people. And when we explore those stories, we understand ourselves better, our world better, and we really see that enduring power of the human spirit.
And if you love this kind of deep dive, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got tons more fascinating topics to unpack, from the ancient world all the way to today. So until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, keep exploring.